You ever get that feeling, that itch you just can't scratch, when someone in a position of petty power decides to make your life miserable for no good reason? Well, multiply that by about 1,000, throw in a picturesque lake I'd enjoyed for 30 years, and a homeowners association president who clearly missed her calling as a feudal despot, and you're getting close to my story. They say you can't fight City Hall, or in this case the HOA, but sometimes, if you're pushed far enough and you've got a bit of know-how, you find a way. I ended up having to buy an entire damn house just to get back to my own lake. Sounds completely bonkers, doesn't it? Trust me, it was. Stick around, drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from, because this tale of suburban warfare, meticulous research, and glorious, hard-won vindication is one for the books. It all started, as these things often do, with a change in leadership. Our sleepy little Lakeside Meadows community had always been a live and let live kind of place. We paid our dues, kept our lawns tidy, and for 3 decades those of us whose properties backed onto the man-made community lake enjoyed relatively unfettered access. My house, one of the originals, had a gently sloping backyard that led to what we all called the Founder's Path, an informal trail worn smooth by years of families heading down for a swim, a bit of fishing, or just to watch the sunset over the water. It wasn't an official easement, just an understanding, a relic from a time when common sense and neighborliness trumped ironclad regulations. Then came Brenda Wilkins. She'd moved in about 5 years prior, into one of the newer, larger houses on the far side of the development. Brenda, bless her heart, immediately saw the HOA not as a collective for community upkeep, but as her personal fiefdom. She got herself elected president on a platform of restoring property values and enforcing the covenants, which, in Brenda speak, translated to making everyone miserable with rules nobody asked for. She was a woman of a certain age, always impeccably, if a bit too sharply, dressed in power suits even for a Saturday morning stroll, her blonde helmet hair seemingly impervious to wind, a perpetual frown etched onto her face, as if she were constantly smelling something unpleasant. She drove a massive, gleaming black Escalade, the kind that seemed to suck all the light out of a parking spot, and wielded her HOA president title like a royal decree. My name's Arthur, by the way. Retired land surveyor and cartographer. I've spent my life understanding lines on maps, property boundaries, and the often convoluted language of deeds and easements. Little did Brenda know, she was about to poke a bear with a particularly niche set of skills. The first sign of trouble was subtle. New laminated signs started appearing around the common areas. Strictly no unauthorized alterations to common property. All recreational activities, subject to HOA board approval. Then came the whispers at the annual potluck. Brenda cornering old Mrs. Gable about the non-conforming bird bath in her front yard, or aggressively measuring the height of Jim Henderson's azaleas with a tape measure she seemed to produce from thin air. The atmosphere grew tense. That Founder's Path? It became her particular obsession. She started referring to it as an unauthorized encroachment and a potential liability nightmare. I tried reasoning with her. I pointed out its decades of peaceful use, the fact that it was primarily used by the very homeowners whose properties abutted it. I even dug out some of my old survey maps from when the development was first planned, showing the general intent for lake access in our area, though admittedly nothing was formally deeded for that specific path. Brenda would just look at me with that condescending little smile, the one that made you want to check if you'd accidentally worn your slippers to the meeting. "Mr. Davies," she'd say, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "While I appreciate your historical perspective, the covenants are quite clear. The HOA is responsible for all common land, and unregulated access points simply cannot be tolerated in this day and age. Insurance, you understand." I understood, all right. I understood she was on a power trip. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning. I was enjoying my coffee on the patio, looking forward to an afternoon of fishing, when I heard the sound of hammering. I walked down to the edge of my property, and there it was. A crew of workers, supervised by Brenda herself, clipboard in hand, pointing imperiously, were erecting a 6-foot-tall chain-link fence along the actual surveyed boundary line of the HOA common area. A boundary line that, yes, technically ran behind our properties, but one that effectively, brutally cut off the founder's path and sealed away the lake access we'd cherished for a generation. My heart sank. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it felt like a violation, a theft of something intangible but deeply valued. I confronted Brenda right then and there. "Brenda, what in the world do you think you're doing?" I tried to keep my voice even, but the anger was there, a cold knot in my stomach. She turned, that smug smile firmly in place. "Just ensuring compliance, Arthur, and enhancing security. We can't have just anyone wandering onto HOA property, can we? This fence will clearly delineate what is HOA land and what is private. It's for the good of the community." "The good of the community?" I retorted, my voice rising despite myself. "You've just cut off half a dozen families from the lake they've used for 30 years. This path has never been a problem. Never." "An unapproved path, Arthur," she corrected, tapping her pen on her clipboard. "And as for access, the official HOA recreational area and boat ramp are on the other side of the lake. A short drive for anyone truly interested in enjoying our beautiful amenity." Her beautiful amenity, the way she said it made my blood boil. The official ramp was a concrete slab next to a parking lot, charmless and inconvenient, especially for those of us who just wanted a quick dip or to launch a kayak from our own side. This fence, this ugly scar of steel and wire, was a declaration of war. My neighbors were equally appalled, but most were older, more resigned. There were murmurs of protest, a few angry phone calls to the HOA management company, who of course deferred everything to President Brenda, but the fence stayed. It loomed there, a monument to Brenda's petty tyranny, glinting in the sun, mocking us. That evening I sat in my study, surrounded by my maps and survey equipment. The anger had cooled into a grim determination. Brenda thought she had won, that her interpretation of the rules was the final word. But rules, I knew, were often layered, sometimes contradictory, and almost always open to interpretation if you dug deep enough. She had built a wall. I needed to find a door. And if a door didn't exist, I'd have to figure out how to build one, or, as it turned out, buy the land it was attached to. My old skills, dormant for a few years since retirement, began to stir. This wasn't just about a path anymore. It was about principle. It was about not letting a bully with a clipboard dictate the terms of my life. The game, as they say, was afoot. And Brenda Wilkins had no idea who she was dealing with. The following weeks were a blur of archival dust, digital databases, and late-night coffee. My first stop was the full set of HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC, rupees, which I read with a surveyor's eye for loopholes and a homeowner's mounting frustration. Brenda was, unfortunately, technically correct about the common land boundary. The founder's path, beloved as it was, had no legal standing. It was a tolerated trespass, and she had every right as HOA president to secure that boundary. This was a setback, but not a defeat. If the direct route was blocked, I needed an indirect one. I pulled out every plat map I could find for Lakeside Meadows, going back to its initial development in the late 1970s. I cross-referenced these with current county tax maps, aerial photographs, and deed records. My study began to look like a command center for a very specific, very localized land dispute. My wife, bless her patient soul, would bring me sandwiches and gently suggest I take a break, but she also saw the glint in my eye, the one that meant I was onto something. She knew this wasn't just about fishing, it was about justice. Brenda, in the meantime, was consolidating her power. She pushed through a new set of aesthetic guidelines that were so restrictive, they made our previously charmingly diverse neighborhood look like it was auditioning for a role in a dystopian movie. The wrong shade of beige on your mailbox? Violation. A garden gnome deemed excessively whimsical? Citation. She even tried to dictate the species of flowers one could plant. It was madness, and it was alienating more and more residents, but many felt powerless. They'd grumble to me over the new fence, but no one seemed to have the energy or the specific expertise to challenge her on her own turf. My focus narrowed. The lake itself was, of course, the centerpiece. The HOA owned a strip of land encircling it, designated as Common Recreational Area. Brenda's new fence ran along the outer boundary of this strip, effectively gating the whole thing in. The official access point she'd mentioned, the boat ramp and small parking lot, was indeed on the far side. But as I pored over an ancient, beautifully hand-drawn subdivision plat from 1978, a forgotten detail jumped out at me. It was a tiny notation, almost an afterthought, on one of the lots that directly adjoined this HOA common land strip, but on the inside of where the main community road looped around. This particular lot, number 47, wasn't a lakefront lot in the premium sense. Its primary frontage was on a quiet cul-de-sac, but its rear property line directly abutted the HOA's recreational land strip near the water's edge. And on this old map, there was a faint dotted line indicating a PED access easement leading from the rear of Lot 47 onto the common land. This was interesting. Very interesting. Modern digital maps often omitted such subtle historical details. I cross-referenced Lot 47 with current ownership records. It belonged to a Mr. James Henderson, Jim Henderson, the same Jim Henderson whose azaleas Brenda had critically measured. He was an elderly widower, one of the original homeowners, known for being quiet and keeping to himself. I vaguely recalled seeing a very old, slightly dilapidated wooden gate in the back fence of his property years ago, almost swallowed by overgrown bushes. Could that be it? Could that gate, if it still existed, and if that easement was still valid, be a potential key? The excitement was a palpable thrum in my chest. I took a discreet walk past Henderson's property. It was a modest, older ranch house, well kept but showing its age. The backyard was large, and sure enough, peeking through a gap in the overgrown ligustrum hedge at the very back, I could just make out the top of a weathered wooden gate. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years. My next step was to verify the easement. This meant a trip to the county records office, a place I knew well from my professional days. I spent an entire afternoon scrolling through microfilm, pulling dusty deed books, and tracing chains of title. And there it was, clear as day in the original deed for Lot 47, recorded in 1979, together with a non-exclusive pedestrian easement for access to the Community Lake recreational area, said easement being 5 feet in width along the westernmost portion of the rear property line of said Lot 47, for the benefit of the owner of Lot 47, his heirs and assigns. Bingo! This wasn't just some informal path. This was a legally recorded, deeded right. It was specific to Lot 47. And crucially, heirs and assigns meant it transferred with the property to any future owner. Brenda's fence, while enclosing the HOA common land, didn't and couldn't extinguish a prior legally recorded private easement onto that land from an adjacent private property. Her fence effectively created a private park, and Mr. Henderson, or whoever owned Lot 47, potentially held a private key to it. I almost laughed out loud in the quiet of the records room. The sheer, beautiful irony of it. Brenda, in her zeal to control access for everyone else, had overlooked or, more likely, been completely ignorant of this one tiny, critical detail. Her fence was designed to keep people out of the common area from the direction of my house and my neighbors. But what if someone could get in from an entirely different, legally unassailable direction? I made a copy of the deed and the relevant plat map page, the paper warm in my hands like a winning lottery ticket. The idea, still nascent, began to form. What if I became the assign of Mr. Rollivant? Henderson? The thought was audacious. Buying a whole house just to use a gate? It was extreme. It was, frankly, a little nuts. But the more I considered it, the more elegant the solution seemed. It wasn't about fighting Brenda on her terms, arguing over HOA bylaws she could twist to her liking. It was about sidestepping her entirely, using established property law that predated her reign and, indeed, the current HOA's overreach. I decided to consult my old friend and occasional golf partner, Tom Albright. Tom was a retired real estate attorney, sharp as a tack, and with a deliciously cynical view of HOA politics. I laid out the situation over coffee, spreading my maps and documents across his dining room table. He listened intently, occasionally chuckling as I described Brenda's antics. When I got to the part about Lot 47 and the easement, he leaned back in his chair, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Arthur, my friend," he said, "you magnificent, devious bastard. This is beautiful. It's a tactical nuke in a squabble over a garden hose." He reviewed the deed and the plat. The easement looks solid. Recorded, specific runs with the land. Her fence doesn't touch this. If you own Lot 47, that gate is your private entrance to her exclusive lakeside paradise. We discussed the potential pitfalls. Could the HOA try to claim the easement was abandoned? Unlikely, as non-use typically doesn't extinguish a deeded easement without further legal action, which hadn't happened. Could they try to buy out the easement? Perhaps, but they'd have to negotiate with the owner of Lot 47, and if that owner was me, the price would be steep. Astronomically steep. So, Tom said, steepling his fingers, the question is Mr. Henderson selling? That was indeed the million-dollar question. Or, more accurately, the several $100,000 question. The plan was no longer just a glimmer, it was a fully formed, albeit audacious strategy. Brenda Wilkins thought she was queen of the lake. She had no idea a quiet cartographer was about to make a bid for a piece of her kingdom, a piece that came with its own private entrance. The irony was so thick, you could spread it on toast. The first step was the most delicate, approaching Mr. Henderson. I knew him only casually, a polite nod exchanged when he was out gardening or getting his mail. He was a man in his late 80s, a widower, and from what I'd heard, increasingly weary of the neighborhood's changing dynamics, particularly under Brenda's iron fist. I didn't want to come across as some vulture looking to exploit an old man, nor did I want to reveal my full strategic hand immediately. I decided on a low-key, neighborly approach. I baked a loaf of my wife's famous sourdough bread, a known peacemaker in our parts, and walked over to his house one sunny afternoon. He answered the door looking a little surprised, a kind man with tired eyes. "Mr. Henderson," I began, "Arthur Davies from down the street. My wife baked some bread, and we had an extra loaf. Thought you might enjoy it." He seemed genuinely touched. "Well now, that's mighty kind of you, Arthur. Please, come in for a moment if you have the time." His house was neat as a pin, filled with old photographs and the scent of lemon polish. We chatted for a while about the weather, the good old days in lakeside meadows, the way things used to be. Gradually, I steered the conversation towards the recent HOA changes, treading carefully. "It's a shame about the lake access for some of us," I said, trying to sound casual. "Brenda Wilkins certainly has her strong opinions on how things should be run." Mr. Henderson sighed, a deep, weary sound. "Tell me about it," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "That woman measured my prize, winning azaleas, can you believe it? Said they were half an inch over the new foliage height ordinance. Never heard of such a thing in all my years." He shook his head. "And the fence, cutting off folks from the water. Just doesn't seem right." This was my opening. "Actually, Mr. Henderson," I said, "I've been doing a bit of research into the original property lines and easements around the lake. Your property is quite unique. Did you know you have a deeded pedestrian access easement directly onto the HOA common land at the back of your lot?" He looked at me, a flicker of something, surprise, memory, in his eyes. "An easement? Yes, I think I do recall something about that from when Martha and I bought this place, way back when. There's an old gate back there. Haven't used it in, Lord, must be 20 years. It's all overgrown now." "Well," I continued, "that easement is still perfectly valid. Legally, that gate is your private entrance to the lake area, fence or no fence on the HOA's part." He mulled this over. "So that busybody Brenda, she can't stop me from using it if I were so inclined?" "Not legally, no." I confirmed. "That right belongs to Lot 47, and therefore to you, its owner." I could see a spark of defiance in his eyes, a subtle rebellion against Brenda's overreach. Over the next few weeks, I visited Mr. Henderson several more times. We'd share coffee, talk about his late wife, his grandkids, his frustrations with the increasingly militant HOA. He was lonely, I realized, and appreciated the company. He also clearly disliked Brenda and her tactics. He mentioned, almost offhandedly one day, that he'd been considering downsizing, moving closer to his daughter in another state, but the thought of selling the house, of dealing with realtors and showings, was daunting at his age. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just about my access to the lake. It could be a mutually beneficial arrangement. I finally broached the subject directly. "Mr. Henderson," I said, choosing my words carefully, "this is going to sound a bit unorthodox. But given your thoughts on moving and my particular interest in that lake access your property uniquely holds, would you ever consider selling your house directly to me? No realtors, no public listing, just a straightforward private sale. I'd offer you a fair market price, of course. He was quiet for a long moment, looking out his window at the azaleas Brenda had so officiously measured. Then he turned to me, a shrewd look in his eye. You really want that lake access back, don't you, Arthur? I do, I admitted, and frankly, I also believe someone needs to remind President Wilkins that she doesn't own the entire world, or even this small corner of it. A slow smile spread across Mr. Henderson's face. You know, Arthur, he said, Martha always loved this house, but she'd have hated what's been happening around here lately. She'd have liked the idea of that woman getting a bit of a surprise. He paused. All right, Arthur, let's talk numbers. If you can make me a fair offer, one that lets me move near my grandkids without a lot of fuss, then yes, I think we can make a deal. And I'd take a certain satisfaction in knowing that Old Gate is going to be put to good use again, especially if it ruffles a few of Brenda Wilkins' feathers. The negotiations were amicable and surprisingly swift. I consulted with Tom Albright on the legalities and to ensure the price was fair to Mr. Henderson while being something I could manage. It meant dipping into savings I'd earmarked for a long-planned trip to Scotland, a sacrifice, but the thought of outmaneuvering Brenda was a powerful motivator. It's a bitter pill, Arthur, spending this kind of money to reclaim something that was morally yours all along, my wife had said, though with a supportive smile. But I haven't seen you this fired up about a project in years. Go for it. And so, we did. The paperwork was drawn up. Title searches confirmed everything was in order, including the precious easement. Mr. Henderson was happy with the offer and the ease of the transaction. He seemed genuinely lighter, unburdened. While all this was happening, Brenda remained blissfully ignorant, continuing her reign of terror. She'd had new, even more ostentatious signs installed on her beloved fence. Private HOA property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law by order of the HOA president. She'd even taken to patrolling the fence line in her Escalade, peering into backyards, a self-appointed guardian of her newly conquered territory. One afternoon, as I was discreetly clearing some of the overgrown brush near Mr. Henderson's back gate, with his permission, of course, as we were under contract, she actually drove by slowly, wound down her window, and called out, "Everything all right over there, Arthur? Just admiring Mr. Henderson's rustic charm, are we?" The condescension was palpable. "Just enjoying the fresh air, Brenda," I replied, giving her my most innocent smile. Oh, if only she knew. The closing day arrived. Mr. Henderson signed the papers, handed me the keys to his house, and more importantly, a very old, slightly rusty key that he'd found in a kitchen drawer, a key he believed was for the back gate. "Haven't seen this in decades," he said, a twinkle in his eye. "Hope it still works. If not, I'm sure a man of your talents can figure it out." I shook his hand warmly. "Thank you, Jim, for everything. I hope you enjoy being closer to your family." "I will, Arthur, and you enjoy that lake. And give Brenda my regards," he added with a wink. I was now the proud, if somewhat financially stretched, owner of Lot 47. The house itself was modest, a bit dated, but solid. I wasn't planning on moving in immediately. My own home was just a few streets over. For now, Lot 47 was a strategic acquisition, a very expensive key to a very specific lock. The first thing I did, even before arranging for the utilities to be transferred, was to walk to the back of my new property. The old wooden gate was indeed there, nestled in the ligustrum, almost invisible from a distance. It was secured by a simple, old-fashioned padlock. I took out the key Jim had given me. It was stiff, but with a bit of wiggling, it slid into the lock. I held my breath and turned. There was a click, a grating sound, and the shackles sprang open. My heart did a little leap. I pulled the gate open. It creaked in protest, stiff from years of disuse, but it opened. And there, beyond it, lay the HOA common land, the neatly mown grass leading down to the sparkling water of the lake. Brenda's imposing chain-link fence ran parallel to my new back property line, just a few feet away, but my gate opened onto the land she had fenced in. I had done it. I had bought my way back to the lake. The delicious secrecy of it was almost unbearable. I closed the gate, relocked it, and spent some time clearing more of the brush, making the gate and the path to it from the house a little more accessible. I even applied a bit of oil to the hinges. I wanted it to swing open smoothly when the time came, the time for the reveal. That would require careful planning. It needed to be public. It needed to be perfectly timed. And most of all, it needed to be a moment Brenda Wilkins would never, ever forget. The next few weeks were a delicious exercise in patience and subtle preparation. I didn't rush. I wanted the reveal to be perfect, a symphony of righteous vindication. I spent some weekends at my newly acquired property, Lot 47, ostensibly doing a bit of light maintenance. I mowed the lawn, trimmed the hedges, including making the area around the crucial back gate look neat and intentional. I even replaced a few rotten boards on the gate itself and gave it a fresh coat of unassuming brown stain, ensuring the old padlock still worked perfectly with Mr. Henderson's key. This activity naturally drew some curiosity. Brenda, ever vigilant, would occasionally cruise by in her Escalade. I'd wave cheerfully. Once, she actually stopped and, from her driver's seat, called out, "So, Arthur, I hear you bought poor old Mr. Henderson's place. Planning on flipping it, are we? Trying to get in on the property value boom I've been creating?" Her tone was laced with that familiar blend of suspicion and superiority. "Just a bit of an investment, Brenda," I replied smoothly. "Lovely little spot, and so close to the lake amenities once you get to them." I gave a pointed look towards the distant official boat ramp. She just sniffed, clearly unimpressed, and drove off. If she only knew how close and how I planned to get to them. My lawyer friend Tom was practically giddy with anticipation. "You've got to pick your moment, Arthur," he'd advise over our now regular strategy coffees. "Make it theatrical, make it hurt." I was also subtly laying the groundwork with a few of my original neighbors, the ones most aggrieved by the fence. I didn't reveal the full plan, just hinted that I was exploring some old property rights, and that things might not be as cut and dried as Brenda thought. This created a little buzz of hopeful speculation. The perfect opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. Brenda, in her infinite wisdom and desire for self-aggrandizement, announced the first annual Lakeside Meadows Lake Appreciation Day. It was to be an HOA-sponsored event held on a Saturday, on the common land by the lake, the very land she had so triumphantly fenced off from many of us. There would be hot dogs, a bouncy castle for the kids, if any dared to bring them to Brenda's domain, and, according to the flyer she'd had stuffed in everyone's mailbox, a special address by HOA President Brenda Wilkins on the responsible stewardship and enhancement of our community's premier natural asset. The irony was almost too much to bear. She was celebrating the lake she'd made inaccessible to half the neighborhood on the land she'd barricaded. This was it. This was the stage. The Saturday of Lake Appreciation Day dawned bright and sunny. I could hear the faint sounds of a PA system being set up as I had my morning coffee on my own patio, looking wistfully at the inaccessible water. Around midday, I saw families starting to trickle towards the official entrance on the far side of the lake. I waited. I wanted an audience. Around 1 p.m., when I figured the event would be in full swing and Brenda would likely be holding court, I made my move. I dressed casually, khaki shorts, a polo shirt, fishing hat, and slung my old tackle box over my shoulder, a fishing rod in hand. I drove over to Lot 47, parked in the driveway, and let myself into the house. I walked through the quiet rooms, a faint smile playing on my lips, and out the back door into the yard. The sounds of the party were louder here. Muffled music, kids shrieking in the bouncy castle, and then, unmistakably, Brenda's amplified voice starting her special address. Perfect timing. I walked calmly to my newly refurbished gate at the back of the property. I took out Mr. Henderson's old key. It slid into the padlock smoothly now. With a satisfying click, I unlocked it. I pulled the gate open. It swung silently on its oiled hinges, and I stepped through from my private property directly onto the HOA's exclusive lakeside common area, right into the middle of Brenda's meticulously planned event. I strolled casually across the lawn towards the water's edge, perhaps 50 yards from where Brenda was standing on a small makeshift stage, microphone in hand, pontificating to a crowd of about 30 or 40 residents. A few people, mostly those seated on the periphery, noticed me first. A child pointed. A murmur went through the crowd. Brenda, mid-sentence about fiscal responsibility and controlled access, faltered. Her eyes, magnified slightly by her reading glasses, darted towards the unexpected movement. She saw me. Her jaw literally dropped. The microphone slipped slightly in her grasp, emitting a brief squawk of feedback. For a moment, there was stunned silence, broken only by the distant hum of the bouncy castle generator. Then, Brenda found her voice, and it was not a happy voice. Arthur Davies. She shrieked into the microphone, all pretense of presidential calm vanishing. What in the Sam Hill do you think you're doing? How did you get in here? This area is for authorized residents attending this event. You're trespassing. The crowd turned to stare. I just smiled pleasantly, leaned my fishing rod against a tree, and opened my tackle box as if preparing to bait a hook. Afternoon, Brenda, I called out cheerfully. Lovely day for it, isn't it? Thought I'd try my luck. The base should be biting near those reeds. Trespassing. She screeched again, her face turning a fascinating shade of puce that clashed horribly with her turquoise pantsuit. I'll have you removed. Security. Oh, wait, we don't have security because this is supposed to be a secure area. She was flustered, completely thrown off her script. A couple of her board member cronies, a nervous-looking man named Gary and Brenda's perpetually flustered secretary Carol, started towards me hesitantly. Mr. Davies? Gary began. President Wilkins is right. This is an HOA event, and that fence… He gestured vaguely. Ah, the fence, I said, nodding sagely. Yes, a very impressive fence, Brenda. Really keeps people out. Most people, anyway. I then turned to my gate, still open, and gestured towards it. But you see this particular gate? This gate, my friends, is on my property, lot 47 to be precise, which I now own. And this gate, I jangled the old key, opens with my key. It provides direct, deeded access to this lovely common area, as per the original plat and easement recorded way back in 1979. Been meaning to do some fishing. Brenda was sputtering. Your property? Your key? That's preposterous. That's HOA land. I had that fence installed myself. You had a fence installed along the HOA boundary, Brenda. Absolutely. I agreed. But you seem to have overlooked the pre-existing, legally recorded pedestrian access easement benefiting Lot 47. An easement that allows the owner of Lot 47, that's me now, to come and go as he pleases onto this common land. I have the deed, the survey map, and a very good lawyer, if you'd like to discuss it further. Tom Albright sends his regards, by the way. At the mention of Tom's name, a lawyer known for not mincing words or suffering fools gladly, Brenda paled slightly. Some of the long-term residents in the crowd, the ones who knew the history and had suffered under Brenda's recent edicts, were starting to grin. A few even let out small, stifled chuckles. This is an outrage. Brenda finally managed, her voice trembling with fury. You can't just buy a house to get around HOA rules. Actually, Brenda, I said, keeping my tone light and conversational. I can, and I did. You built a wall. I just bought the door, and the land it's attached to. Perfectly legal. Perfectly above board. I then made a show of casting my line, unbaited of course, I wasn't actually planning on fishing just then, into the lake. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe President Wilkins was in the middle of a very important speech about lake stewardship. Don't let me interrupt. The meltdown was glorious. Brenda looked like she was about to spontaneously combust. She stammered, she gesticulated, she appealed to her bewildered board members, who were now backing away slowly, clearly wanting no part of this. She even pulled out her phone and theatrically threatened to call the police. Go right ahead, Brenda, I said calmly. I'm sure they'd be very interested in reviewing my property deeds and the county plat maps. I have copies with me if it helps. She knew she was beaten. The legal terms, the calm certainty in my voice, the mention of Tom Albright, it all combined to deflate her like a punctured bouncy castle. Her lake appreciation day was in ruins. All anyone was talking about was Arthur Davies and his magic gate. She mumbled something about unbelievable audacity and consulting the HOA attorney immediately. Then practically fled the makeshift stage, her turquoise pantsuit, a vibrant streak of angry retreat. The party atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a buzz of excited chatter and disbelief. Several of my old neighbors came over, congratulating me, shaking my hand, some with tears of laughter in their eyes. "Arthur, you legend, old mister!" Peterson exclaimed. "I haven't seen Brenda that color since someone planted petunias instead of pansies. The best part? Her fence was still there, a monument to her folly. But now, there was a perfectly legal, perfectly private way through it. My way. And Brenda Wilkins knew, with dawning, horrified certainty, that her reign over the lake was effectively over. The aftermath of Lake Appreciation Day was swift and, for Brenda, brutal. Her authority, built on bluster and the meticulous enforcement of petty rules, crumbled once people saw she could be outmaneuvered, not by breaking her rules, but by understanding older, more fundamental ones, property rights. She did, of course, consult the HOA attorney. I heard through the grapevine, our neighborhood was a veritable jungle of information now, that the attorney, after reviewing the documents I'd happily provided copies of via Tom Albright, essentially told Brenda she didn't have a legal leg to stand on. The easement was ironclad. My ownership of Lot 47 was indisputable, the gate was mine, and my access was absolute. Her only recourse would be to try and buy the easement from me, and I think we all knew what my asking price for that would be. Somewhere in the realm of when hell freezes over, and then doubles. Brenda tried to rally her remaining support on the HOA board. She called an emergency board meeting, the agenda vaguely citing urgent matters pertaining to common area security and access. Several of us, including me, now a stakeholder with very specific interests in common area access, made sure to attend. It was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room that suddenly felt charged with anticipation. Brenda, looking somewhat haggard despite her usual sharp attire, tried to frame my actions as some sort of nefarious loophole exploitation, a threat to the order and sanctity of Lakeside Meadows. She spoke of unintended consequences and the spirit of the rules. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice tight with suppressed rage, pointing a quivering finger at me, "has deliberately circumvented the clear intent of the HOA's security measures for his own personal gain." Before I could even respond, old Mrs. Gable, the one whose birdbath had been deemed a violation, stood up, her voice surprisingly strong. "Intent, Brenda? The intent for 30 years was for us folks living by the lake to use the lake. You're the one who came in and changed everything, put up that ugly fence, and started treating us like criminals in our own neighborhood. Arthur here just found a clever, legal way to restore a bit of common sense. I, for one, applaud him." A smattering of applause broke out. Brenda's face tightened further. Other residents spoke up, voicing their own grievances about her heavy-handed tactics, the endless stream of violation notices for trivial matters, the general atmosphere of oppression she had cultivated. It was less an HOA board meeting and more a referendum on her presidency. Her enablers on the board, Gary and Carol, looked increasingly uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact with her. They could see the tide had turned. Brenda tried to argue that my gate now posed a new security risk. "How do we know who Mr. Davies will allow through his private gate?" she demanded. "It undermines the entire purpose of the fence." "Brenda," I replied calmly, "my gate is on my private property. Who I allow onto my private property and subsequently through my private deeded easement is frankly my business. However," I added, seeing an opportunity, "I am a reasonable man. I understand some of my longtime neighbors, original homeowners who enjoyed the lake for decades before your fence, feel as aggrieved as I did. Perhaps a more neighborly solution could be found for them, but neighborly solution could be found for them, but calm too of neighborly solution could be found for them. One that doesn't involve the entire community having a key, but ensures those who were unfairly disenfranchised can once again enjoy the water." I wasn't about to throw open the floodgates, but the implication was clear. I could be selective, and Brenda would have no say in it. This infuriated her even more, the thought of me controlling access, but it also further isolated her. The board meeting ended with no resolution for Brenda, only a clear sense that her support had evaporated. Over the next few weeks, I did indeed work out a system. I spoke with the half-dozen or so original homeowners whose informal lake access had been cut off by Brenda's fence. I explained that while the gate was on my land and the easement was mine, I was willing to provide them with a key to the padlock, a copy of Mr. Henderson's old key, under a simple written agreement, for their personal use only, no large parties, respect the land, and understand that this was a privilege I was extending, not an HOA-sanctioned right. They were overjoyed. It wasn't the old, completely open founder's path, but it was access, legitimate and unharried by Brenda. The sight of old Mr. Poffer W.W. Peterson heading down to the lake with his grandkids and his fishing gear, using my gate, brought a smile to my face every time. Brenda's attempts to find some other way to thwart me failed. She apparently looked into whether the HOA could condemn the easement laughable. The legal costs and justification would be astronomical. She tried to get the HOA to pass new rules about secondary access points to common areas. Again, couldn't override a pre-existing deeded right without my consent or a hefty payout. She was stuck. Her beautiful, expensive fence was still there, but it was now a symbol of her impotence, with a very clear, very legal hole punched right through its defenses, a hole only a select few, chosen by me, could use. The defeat took its toll on her. The crispness of her pantsuit seemed to wilt. The Escalade was seen less often on its patrol routes. She became quieter at HOA meetings, her pronouncements less forceful. The following spring, at the annual HOA election, Brenda Wilkins did not run for re-election as president. In fact, she didn't even attend the meeting. A few months after that, a for sale sign appeared in front of her large house on the other side of the development. The word was, she was moving to a new, more exclusive gated community, presumably one where she could be assured that all gates remained firmly under the control of the powers that be. The day her moving van pulled away, a quiet cheer went up among many of the long-term residents. The house I bought, Lot 47, became my little lakeside retreat. I didn't sell my original home. I enjoyed them both. I'd spend afternoons at Lot 47, working in the garden, sometimes just sitting by the gate, enjoying the quiet satisfaction of my victory. The gate itself, once a forgotten relic, became a quiet symbol in the neighborhood. A symbol of perseverance, of the power of knowing your rights, and of the fact that even the most entrenched bully can be toppled with a bit of research, a bit of courage, and in my case, the strategic acquisition of a small, unassuming house with a very important key. The HOA, under new, more reasonable leadership, eventually even softened some of Brenda's more draconian aesthetic rules. A sense of neighborliness began to return to Lakeside Meadows. The founder's path remained officially closed by the fence, a scar from Brenda's reign, but my gate provided a civil, orderly alternative for those who had been wronged. And that, folks, is the story of how I bought a house to open a gate, and in doing so, helped restore a little bit of sanity and fairness to our community. It just goes to show, never underestimate a quiet man with a set of old maps and a deep-seated sense of justice. Sometimes the most effective way to deal with someone who builds a wall isn't to tear it down, but simply to find your own perfectly legal way through. Let me know if you've ever had an HOA battle quite like this one. It's a wild world out there. Stay informed, read the fine print, and never be afraid to stand up for what's right, even if it means taking the scenic and occasionally expensive route.